Welcome, everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 8th of July, 2026, and this is the Cluster API office hours. Cluster API is a sub-project of Kubernetes SIGs. As such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which could be summarized as please be excellent to each other and raise your hand if you'd like to talk, but there's only three of us, so I don't think we'll need to do that. All righty, so we can skip over some of our normal agenda because all three of us know each other and we're not new attendees. Stefan, you don't want to talk about any open proposals, do you? Would you?
Only the one that I have in the agenda.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go right into the agenda then. And yeah, Stefan, please tell us about the code organization proposal.
Yeah, so basically Fabrizio talked about it last week, and we're basically just defining like a bit of a new folder structure and which guarantees we want to have for which packages in the proposal. Some of that stuff was already ongoing, so we just literally just wrote down what we're doing. Um, and yeah, we would like to merge this around next week. I would just say let's put a lazy consensus on it. If someone sees this or sees the proposal, if they need more time, they can always tell us, right? But otherwise, we'll just merge and move on so that we can basically get a new structure as quickly as we can. I'm not sure how much we are still going to do before the code freeze, but most of the stuff that is in there won't lead to additional changes for anyone. So, I remember I talked about this with Fabrizio. So basically, the stuff like establishing new API module is already done. So this is not like a short-term change before the code freeze. The other things that we're considering still doing before the code freeze is things like moving the core provider in its own structure, because today it's like mixed into like the top level structure, but usually not a lot of other people are importing like parts of like the core copy provider, and most of that stuff is internal today anyway. So that should be fine to do this, like let's say at the mid or towards the end of the cycle and not at the beginning of the cycle or something. Yep. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Once you're done with writing, let's check back on the meeting notes if I wrote anything else in the agenda that I want to say. But probably there's not much there. Yeah, so lazy consensus next week. And yeah, that's just what I made up from scratch. As you're still thinking about moving like core copy and a few other things around. But we will not move usual X controllers. Ah, that's not util slash X controllers. It's like we won't move the util package, the X package, and the controllers package. So like there's not one package, there's three different packages. Oh my god, I'm confusing myself here. Um,
Maybe you should use like vertical pipe instead of
yes,
slash. You know
yes, that works. Thanks for fixing it.
what I mean?
Yeah, that's basically everything for that point. Except if someone wants to comment on it. I saw Mike already review. Thanks for that. I don't know if you want to take another look. But basically, I think the findings were straightforward and we addressed them.
Yeah,
Or
like
maybe already took another look. I don't
yeah,
know.
my requests were all just kind of like minor nits around language. I think the proposal
Yeah.
looked fine to me.
Yeah.
So
I had a bunch more in the same style and I just pushed the commit on top of Fabrizio's commit and he checked my changes. So basically we're pairing on that. Yep.
cool. Yeah, I don't, Nolan, Mohammed, do you guys have any questions about the code organization proposal? And Mohammed, I know you just showed up, but Stefan's proposing a lazy consensus on the 15th of July to merge the proposal.
Well, that's okay. I'm just joining to see what's going on, but that's fine. Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Um,
Okay.
Okay. Next one.
Yeah, next one.
So I'm now at a point where I can deal with like backlog items that have been bumping around for half a year or something. That's why this topic is coming back up. So basically, I saw on a few Kubernetes PRs that Jordan Liggett was mentioning that they decided like last year in October, that it's not mandatory anymore that when you have like copyright notices or that copyright header that you have in every Go file, that you put like the year number in there. So that was changed in KK. There's like a PR, I think, linked at the end of this.
There's a
Or
bunch of
maybe I think I linked. Maybe just go to the copy PR because there I linked the KK PR. So basically, yeah, based on a little bit further down. That's the one. So they made a change in KK basically to change the validation of copyright headers. And basically the only thing that they allow is like no year or every year up until 2025. So if someone would now add a new copyright header and they would correctly set 2026, then the Linde would complain that you either have to use 25. I mean, it's not, it's just saying like you're wrong. It doesn't tell you what to do. But it would just complain about you're wrong. And then people would give like a hint. I should just not use a year basically. And I did the same for us. I just had to move it by 1 year because if I would already produce failures on 2026, then we would already have a ton of failures from 2026. Right, because like mid of the year, and we have a bunch of new stuff. So yeah, I did this here in Cappy. I did the same thing for KP. I'm also mentioning it here because FYI, in case someone cares about that, maybe it's good to know. But maybe you also want to do this in your provider or somewhere else. If you're a bit tired of like copyright header police jumping on PRs and telling you you have to use a different year if you copy pasted the wrong year or something.
Totally.
So that's mostly why I want to get rid of it because. It's easy just then rather than not having a year versus randomly having to nitpick on like, oh, you used the wrong year, which is just a waste of time.
That always messes me up too, because it's like, oh, I'm writing a new file. So like this old one says 2020 copyright, the new one says 2026. Like what is this even? Does it even matter?
Yeah. Also, one nuance, there was some guidance somewhere, I think, in the steering committee issue around like that existing files should not be touched.
Okay.
So that's why I'm not doing like a global SED to get rid of the years in every single Go file that we have or something.
Right, that makes sense.
It's only for new stuff.
And I'm gonna have to go back and read this because like now I'm kind of curious about like I'm curious about the legalistic reasons, but it's all the links are there, so like
yeah, I'm not have fun. Let me know if I'm doing something wrong.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm probably fine because I just copy pasted what I did. Yeah, so that's just that. Yeah, and I think that's it. Otherwise, regarding what's going on, I think we just slowly get closer to like beta releases and code freezes. If I remember correctly, the code freeze is scheduled for like end of the month and the next beta for like in a week or two. Yeah, so it's that time of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
But also it's summer here, so yeah. I don't know, people try to not work too much.
Right, totally. All right, cool. I guess while Nolan's typing out his agenda item here, anybody have questions? I guess Mohammed or Nolan, you guys got questions about any of this stuff? Okay. Well, we'll wait for Nolan to go ahead, Nolan, take it away.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up a question that came up in the Kappa provider meeting.
You're a little quiet too.
Is that better? Better, okay. So we had a question in the Kappa meeting earlier this week about users were deleting their infra cluster object. So in this case, it was Rosa cluster. And they were surprised to see things not get cleaned up. Is there an expectation that the infrastructure clusters controller should be looking at the parent cluster and gating on whether or not there's a deletion timestamp there? Or is that not a hard requirement?
Let me check. I'm looking at a book. So I think there is an expectation. Oh my God, that's weird.
I was reading some of the docs and it wasn't immediately clear to me. I see there's a conditional checking it, but I don't see if it gates the whole deletion.
Yeah, but my interpretation of what I'm seeing there is a little bit that it should basically only go for reconcile delete if it has a cluster owner. But I'm definitely not spotting anything that is saying like you should check that the cluster has a deletion timestamp. But that sounds like a good idea to add that. I think we can't really make it mandatory or something, but we can at least say like, hey, that's the best practice or something, right? So why I'm thinking that is mostly around, like, let's say it would be different. So if I got it right, the case where you were hitting this, you already have this check, right? We were just asking like, is this like the expectation that it is that way, or is it not there at the moment?
As far as I know, it's not there. So my
So they delete the
understanding,
infra cluster and then they're confused that nothing else happens, but the infra cluster maybe
correct.
goes through deletion or something like that.
The if Mohammed can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the user deletes the infra cluster,
Yeah.
and then all the other child resources under the cluster are still around because
Okay.
we
Yeah.
don't propagate things up that way, and there's not really anything preventing them.
Okay. Got it. Mohammed, do you want to add something before I answer?
Yeah, so it's more like, is there any, could be like blocker or something that prevent the infra cluster when you start to be deleted to check or cascade delete the cluster as well? That could be like the other way around. So when you delete cluster, you cascade delete everything. And when you delete the infra cluster, the provider cluster, you also cascade delete everything to be like, in the same way.
Okay. So my take on it is, I mean, in general, the normal idea, of course, is that someone deletes the cluster object and then the cluster controller is orchestrating to delete stuff in the right order. And I think one reason why we want to do it that way is because, let's say you delete the infra cluster first. That's not always possible because I think in some providers, basically, if you delete the infra cluster, you would sort of delete the network, but then maybe you still have machines. And I think, was it AWS? You cannot delete the VM if you cannot delete the network if there's still a VM in that network. And so it's like the wrong order. So my feeling is a little bit like, given that the current standard is sort of like the cluster controller orchestrates the deletion, it's doing that when you delete the cluster object, and we want to stick to that ordering. Then I think the behavior should be that if the infra cluster has a deletion timestamp, but the cluster has not, that the infra cluster controller should basically just return. I mean, it should check that, and it should just return an error if the cluster doesn't have a deletion timestamp, and basically tell people to delete the cluster object and do absolutely nothing at that time. And then when someone sees that error message, they can basically delete the cluster object. Then the cluster controller can delete all the other stuff in order.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
wait, this doesn't work. Sorry. This doesn't work because basically the moment someone, I mean, I think it's still probably the best we can do, but the moment someone adds a deletion timestamp on a cluster object, that safeguard that we added to the infra cluster would also say, okay, now I can move ahead with my deletion because the cluster has deletion timestamp. It will still be in the wrong order. But yeah, I mean, maybe at least the default behavior would be like, the infra cluster controller tries to delete stuff in cases where it's not possible. It just produces errors like, oh, I cannot delete my network because of the VM. It's probably not like 100% safe, but maybe in most cases from most providers, it will still behave in a good way.
but I mean, like the order is fine. What I mean is when someone mistakenly delete the infra cluster check if the cluster is being deleted or not. If it's not being deleted, then it initiate delete the cluster. So then the cascade delete will happen in the right order as well after. So that's like kind of enhancing user experience. So you can delete cluster or create, whenever.
I think it will still be the wrong thing to delete the infra cluster object because the moment you put a deletion timestamp on the infra cluster, you basically take it out of the hands of the cluster controller to orchestrate the cluster deletion in the right order.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would just say people should not put a delete on the infra cluster. So I would not make this workflow better. I would just try to prevent people from actually doing that. So, I mean, just to give an example, I think one thing that could be implemented is that, oh no, that's too tricky. Or maybe it's still sort of fine. I don't know. I have to think about more. But I think one thing that would maybe avoid these mistakes is that you have on the infra cluster validate delete webhook where you're looking, like, oh, if someone does a delete on the infra cluster object and the infra cluster object has an owner ref, then let's get a corresponding cluster object. And if that cluster object does not have a deletion timestamp, then you just return an error and tell people, hey, you deleted the wrong object, don't do that. And then you would never enter into the phase where you have a deletion timestamp on an infra cluster while you don't have one on the cluster object. Just a spontaneous idea. Maybe I missed something.
Yeah, okay.
I would rather go in this direction versus infra-cluster deletion also triggers a cluster deletion. But I mean, it's still the wrong thing, right? You still have a problem with orchestration, but it somehow works slightly better than before. I'm not sure if I would try to go down that way.
Nolan, I think you're next.
Would it make sense? Would it make sense to have a finalizer on the infra cluster that would only get removed if the cluster has a deletion timestamp? Or is
So
that
the problem, so it depends on what you want to achieve with a finalizer. One problem that I noticed in the past is that basically a finalizer is usually not seen as like a pre-reconcile delete hook. It's just let's keep the object in etcd until the finalizer goes away, right? But I mean, let's say I would very naively just say like, I mean, sorry, in most cases, when I have a finalizer on there, you don't have the owning controller checking for finalize and saying like, oh, if there's a finalizer on there, then I won't do reconcile delete. In most cases, it's just the Kubernetes garbage collector that doesn't do anything in that case. Maybe there are established patterns around that and we can use that. But I think the only pattern that I know in copy today that we have is like an explicit pre-terminate hook annotation, which comes very close to having like a, I don't know, pre-delete hook annotation or something. I mean, so what I'm saying is like, if the goal of the finalizer would be to basically block the execution of the reconcile delete code in infra-cluster, I'm not sure if finalizer is like the right or proper means to do that.
sure?
But it could also be that I'm just not aware of like all the proper usages of finalizer. And maybe it's also an established use case to have some finalizer that is actually blocking reconcile delete logic in controllers. I just don't know it, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And I think finalizers are tricky to get right, and they lead to their own issues. So
yeah, and maybe you also end up in a scenario where you have to start worrying about ordering of finalizers. I'm not entirely sure if you would get in that, but maybe that's also like an Andy pattern that you would slide into. Right, because you would basically put a finalizer on there that says like, don't run reconcile delete yet or something. But then you also have the other finalizer, which is the one from the actual infra cluster. And I'm just not sure if this is good or not.
Well, Mohammed, go ahead.
Well, yeah, one point also suggest I'm not convinced that deleting the cluster will still remain the wrong order. Like I'm not sure why we should stick with this constraint. Like if you like as an AWS cluster or Rosa cluster, checking your core copy cluster, if it's there, you delete it. So then your Rosa controller or like whenever AWS controller will initiate deleting of the cluster. So then the cluster will then start do the order of delete cascade. So
But infra cluster already has deletion timestamp at that point, right? So we're already not following the regular deletion order.
yeah, but
So-
that's fine. That's fine because we keep recounseling in any way. Like let's assume you delete the cluster and then you got error while deleting one of the machine or whatever. So then you're
Yeah, but I mean, this is just like best effort. Hopefully, the cloud API fails, right? It could also be that in some other infrastructure, the infra cluster controller can actually delete a network, and then maybe your machine deletions are getting stuck with some weird error. I mean,
Yeah,
we know
that's
that
fine.
AWS behaves that way. We know that AWS can deal with that, and will just block if it deletes stuff in the wrong order. So, my opinion, we have one supported workflow in which we delete stuff. I would not establish other random ways of going through deletion flows and just hoping that the cloud API is sort of blocking us in reconcile delete flows.
Okay, it's just based of user experience. So as a user experience, sometimes people do that. So and as well as GitHub.
Yeah, but I think it's fundamentally wrong if they delete the infra cluster first. It's literally not supported.
Well, it's not, yeah, it's not supported, but we put this constraint on us. It's not really a constraint, like
I mean,
especially for
let's think this through, right? I mean, I think one step further is like people are just deleting the namespace, and every single object in an entire class API cluster gets a deletion timestamp at the same point in time. Because I also had to deal with issues like that. And the only solution to that is if you basically take every single controller that you have, and every single controller has to check all the other objects to figure out at which point in time it can go through its own reconcile delete flow. And one problem there is that this is not just about copy controllers, right? If you have some other CRDs that you create, because you have basically a third-party controller managing your VM in the cloud, then also this controller has to check all the copy objects to figure out if it can go through deletion flow or not. That's where I'm coming from, because we had issues like that. So our vSphere example, for just to make an example, we have all the copy objects, but when we want to create a VM in vSphere, we actually create a virtual machine object, and someone else is creating that VM in vSphere. So if you follow that pattern, like someone can just delete the namespace or delete objects in random order, even that third-party controller basically has to look into the copy object to see what the state of the cluster deletion flow is, to figure out when exactly it can go through a deletion workflow of a worker machine and of a controller machine, and doesn't even have a concept of what a worker and a control plane machine is. So that's why I don't really want to open the door of like, as a user, you can just do whatever you want, and somehow we modify all controllers, including third-party controllers that we just use, to somehow still respect the right ordering in which they should go through the reconcile delete. I just think it's unrealistic that we make that happen. I know it mostly works by accident today. That's also what I got from like people in my company, like, oh, but it just works. But once you try to build this in a way that it's really robust, I think it's almost impossible to do right. We can plug some holes, but I don't see a good concept to do this.
Yeah, so what I say is that it doesn't like what apply on the case you're talking, it doesn't mean it will apply for everyone. So from our experience, the user like often do that. They delete the unmanaged AWS cluster CR or there was a control plan CR, and then they expect to have cascade delete as well. So what happened is all the Kappa providers infrastructure get deleted because actually they get deleted in real infrastructure. And then sometimes the copy customer resource left over there keep raising error that the CR is not there anymore. So one
Do,
way to enhance the user experience here is to just start the cluster delete, and it match what the recounseling behavior happen with Rosa control plan and like copy. So I mean,
do,
what I mean is it doesn't like whenever case you have, it shouldn't be applied for all cases. There are some cases as well that could deal differently. So
do we know why people think they only have to delete the infra-cluster object and not the cluster object to get rid of a cluster? That seems like an awkward idea to me.
will it happen? That happened. But
I mean, are they, I mean, just, so I just imagine if I'm a copy user, right? And when I create my cluster, I create a cluster object. But when I delete, I basically ignore the cluster object and just delete the infra-cluster object instead. So what I can understand is that, somehow people are just deleting the entire namespace or they're deleting all objects at the same time. Like this stuff happens, right? What I just find pretty awkward is that somehow they delete the infra cluster, but not the cluster object. And if I understood correctly, right? That seems what people are doing.
Nolan, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I was going to ask what Stefan just brought up. In this case, are the users, when a user spins up a Rosa cluster through this mechanism, are they creating the CAPI cluster or are they creating the Rosa infra cluster?
well, for me, they create both. So they create the cluster CR and then they create the Rosa control plan and Rosa cluster. But users spend like set the configuration in the Rosa control plan CR. So for people like the cluster is just for orchestration when they try to like have managing multiple cluster. So they
So,
just consider the CAPI as orchestration layer, not really the layer that create or delete.
okay. So I would push back on that and say the orchestration layer is the layer that does creation and deletion. So if the user is today making a new cluster by creating the cluster object and then getting the Rosa controller or the Rosa cluster, I think I'm not sure why the deletion order is different then. Like they're interacting with the cluster object from the start when they make a new cluster.
Yeah, that's fine. So that's actually what we mentioned in our documentation, that you have to delete the cluster first. But what happened often, sometimes this happens. So I was just looking for an easy way to, so other way, then they have to, go delete the cluster, and then they remove the finalizers and go, do all the dirty work to clean up the custom resource. So they did a mistake. It's a mistake. I'm not saying it's the right way as we support today. It's just moving forward to not having this happening again for everyone did this mistake. So starting the initiate the delete as well, it should work like, and it will make everything a clean, enhanced user experience. So that could be like, another way. I'm not saying they create cluster, so they should delete the cluster. They create machine pool, so they should delete the machine pool and delete the machine pool. So that's while when they get deleted, we tell them, okay, just only delete the cluster, don't delete the others. So then they come ask, okay, why here I'm deleting only one CR, not deleting the other, but in this way I'm only deleting this, I have to delete the others. So that's the user experience point of view.
Yeah, I don't- like I the now that I've heard this and heard it all out, like I agree with Stefan and you know and Nolan, I guess. Like when a user goes to delete, if a user tries to delete the infra cluster resource, yeah, they should just get an immediate error message back that says, please delete cluster object this instead of this one if you want to delete the cluster. Like that seems like the easiest fix to this. Like, why is that not a good option for users, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to tell info providers to not do what they want to do, right? So if some
No,
info
no,
provider
for
wants to
sure.
implement that way, I'm fine. I just think like if you have a choice between telling people to delete a cluster object, instead they will see this error message 1 or 2 times and then they probably will learn
Right.
versus supporting the other flow, which is a deletion which somehow works, but it still goes through deletion in the wrong order. I would just not try to support the other flow.
Right. Like we just say, like, look, the cluster API project does not support deletion of the infra cluster object as a way to delete the cluster. It may be interesting that it worked for you once or twice, but that's not supported. If you want to do something that's supported, you delete the cluster object. And then we should be pushing users towards the supported behavior. Like that, I get what you're saying, Mohammed. Like this is like it makes for a nice user experience if they can delete any object and then the whole thing goes away. But I think we should just be giving good error messages that that push users in the right direction, I guess. That's my feeling at least. All right. Anything else we want to talk about on this topic? And welcome, Daniel. We had a very long discussion about uh, infra cluster deletion. Any other questions or comments on that one? Okay, if there's nothing else, then I think we can call it a meeting and take back about 25 minutes of our day here. Uh,
Thank you for hosting.
yeah, if there's nothing else.
I guess.
All right, cool.
Bye bye. See you next week.
Later, everybody.